Hello, Michael. Nice to meet you. Nice to be able to put a face to you because I guess we've had a couple of discussions on Facebook, so it's good to actually be able to see you and talk to you in person here. So as far as this debate goes, what we're essentially going to be going into is the question of whether or not any further investigation into the Trump campaign is warranted. And I would contend that the evidence is certainly there that we should continue with that investigation. So let's look at some of this evidence. First of all, we have Michael Flynn, the former Trump national security advisor, who was fired after he met with and then covered up and even offered inaccurate testimony regarding his meetings with the Russian ambassador. He then even misled his own boss, Vice President Pence, about the natures of those dealings. Later on, Trump tried to pressure the director of the FBI into not even investigating those actions. Those actions in and of themselves are worth investigation. And the fact that Trump inserted himself into that is already reason to be going into a further investigation there. But it goes further than that. Paul Manafort, Trump's former campaign advisor, who was also an advisor to Viktor Yanukovych, the pro-Russia former president of Ukraine, was a business associate of Paul Manafort's. And Manafort even received $12 million from Yanukovych. The two of them had multiple meetings together, and Manafort was recently, this was the thing that brought this up most recently in the news, Manafort testified before the grand jury on, I believe it was July 25th. And then the next morning, in the pre-dawn hours, the FBI raided his home. In order for a judge to have released a warrant to let such a raid take place, there must have already been evidence showing probable cause that Mr. Manafort committed a crime and that the evidence of it would be found in his home. Not only that, but the fact that they enabled it to happen in the pre-dawn hours means it must have been a rushed warrant, which only happens if there is a need to access information quickly out of worry that the information might be destroyed. So that in and of itself is further information saying this investigation is needed. Jeff Sessions twice met with the Russian ambassador. The Trump dossier compiled by ex-spy and former MI6 agent found Trump vulnerable to blackmail. Donald Trump Jr. intentionally tried to collude with the Russian government, and his emails said that that was specifically what he was trying to do. Over and over and over again, you see ties between the Trump campaign and Russia. The question then is, what does that mean? Well, we don't know. We don't know what exactly happened, which is why further investigation is warranted.
Okay, you really threw a lot of stuff on the wall, and it's kind of hard. I should have been taking better notes. Thus far, you have not been able to allege any crime that may have been committed by Trump. I'm not suggesting collusion is good, and I do not think that Trump did any collusion, but if Trump had had a contact with Russia, that's not illegal. Hillary had definite contact with the Ukrainian people. The Ukrainian government was trying to assist her, and if it's illegal to collude that way, and it is not, then Trump has not, there's no real direct tie from Trump to Russia, but there is a direct tie from Hillary to the Ukraine. Also, you have to take a look at it that if it's illegal, you would have to take a look and say, on a equal basis, if we do not want Russia interfering or any other country interfering in our election, why did we have Obama interfering in the Israeli election, stealing $300,000 of taxpayer money to aid the effort to get Netanyahu to lose the election? Why was Obama in trying to put his finger on the thumb of the Brexit vote? So collusion by itself, I don't like it. And I think it's just like, if your party takes donations from the KKK, it's not illegal. It's seamy, it's seedy, but it is not illegal. Thus far, you have failed to demonstrate any real linkage to Trump and an illegal act. And so you're suggesting that the solution is because there's some allegations then that is sufficient to empower a special prosecutor. The special prosecutor being given an unlimited amount of money. How many congressmen would like to have a special prosecutor poring over their records? Maxine Waters has served in the Congress for decades and decades, never had a job that paid more than $180,000 a year, and yet she's a multimillionaire living in a very multimillionaire costing mansion. I would say that just the very appearance of impropriety suggests that we need a special prosecutor to look at her. There's plenty of real evidence that suggested that Hillary committed a number of illegal acts with her server, her pay-to-play as Secretary of State, and yet no grand jury was impaneled, and no special prosecutor was appointed. So to suggest that we have a justice system, I'm sorry, we've got a lot of corruption in the justice system.
Okay. So first, you pointed out that I have not presented any crime that has been committed by Trump. Now, I have 4 responses to this. The first response I have is that it is an investigation. You cannot say that there is a crime that has been committed without the actual investigation taking place. The question is, should that investigation go forward? And the fact that there are so many links going on between Trump and Russia, many of which the Trump campaign has vehemently denied, even though they were then proven to have happened, shows that there is something more going on than they are admitting, which is why this is necessary to be able to determine what actually happened. That's why I threw out so many different pieces of evidence linking the 2 campaigns, the Russian government and the Trump campaign. We even saw Trump Jr. specifically try to reach out to the Russian government and then vehemently denied that over and over and over. The point is, there should be an investigation into why those sorts of things were happening. The second response I have is that of Paul Manafort. Trump himself may not have committed a crime, but the fact that the FBI just raided Manafort's house says that he is suspected of a crime, and he, as the former campaign manager to Trump, is a link to Trump, which is part of why this investigation would continue. The third response I have is that Trump wrote his son's response. When Donald Trump Jr. talked about why he had met with the Russian lawyer a few months back, Donald Trump was the one who said, this is the way that we're going to frame this. Donald Trump specifically involved himself in the issue. Then he did the same thing with Mike Flynn when he told Comey not to investigate that. Donald Trump has specifically involved himself into that. And the fourth response I have is that of a standard, an international standard. If there is to be an investigation, we would want to have such an investigation when there is a question of American democratic principles being undermined. That is what is at stake here. It's possible. We don't know exactly what happened, but that's why a grand jury investigation is warranted. You then talked about how Hillary had connections to the Ukrainian government. Okay, well, that's bad. And I agree. There should be a further investigation into that if it hasn't been done already. That's bad. And if you think that's bad, you should agree that it was bad when Trump did it as well. You talked about how Obama had interfered in Israel. Same response. That's terrible. If you think it's bad then, and I do think it's bad then, I don't think that we should be interfering in other people's governments. If you actually think that's bad, then you should be worried that it's possible that Russia may have done that to the United States, which is why we would have such an investigation to see what actually happened. The fact that there is an overwhelming amount of links, all of which are being contested, means that there is need for further information and evidence.
Okay, I think what you have to take a look at is that you've suggested that we investigate first to find a crime, and that's a complete violation of the entire process. Right now, Mueller was appointed to actually do a investigation of security issues and not a criminal investigation. We do not routinely turn prosecutors loose to investigate to the nth degree in hopes of finding a crime. There is supposed to be a specific crime listed, enumerated, before you empower a special prosecutor to conduct a criminal investigation. For Trump, that has not been done. You threw out on the wall about the MI6 dossier. What you failed to mention is the fact that the dossier is tied back to people in the Democrat Party who were paying for it. Comey, the FBI, was potentially going to pay $50,000 for it. The whole FBI and DOJ are seriously compromised in being able to conduct an honest and fair investigation. It's basically, it's an Alice in Wonderland, the Queen of Hearts, where you're going to have a verdict first and then you'll have a trial later. You're just basically suggesting that we need to dig in hopes of finding a real crime, but under the normal rules, you don't start a criminal investigation until you have a crime. And there has been no crime by Trump, okay? It is nothing illegal for Trump to discuss with his son. And when you said that Trump was trying to get with the Russians to get information, it was the other way around. The Russians reached out and said, I've got some dirt on Hillary. Now, let me tell you, when Hillary, if you'd read the book, Clinton Cash, you would see that Hillary was basically one of the people who signed off on the sale of 20% of U.S. uranium mining to the Russians. And at the same time, her husband got huge speaking fees. And at the same time, the Clinton Foundation got over $100 million from parties involved in this transaction. There's something that you have a real evidence of potential problems, potential illegalities, and it would be appropriate to appoint a special prosecutor and panel a grand jury. And the DOJ failed to do that, showing that they are seriously compromised. We can't trust them. In the meantime, you know, you mentioned Paul Manafort. He came in for a brief time. He was the things that you're accusing him of happened well before he was involved in Trump. He was only involved with Trump for about 4 or 5 months, and then he was replaced. So to tie Trump to Manafort, I think it's smearing. Well, I'll pass it back to you right now.
I think it's important to talk about the focus of this panel, which does not necessarily have to be specifically about Donald Trump. It is about a possible interference in the American election, which may have involved Donald Trump. We don't know. But what we do know is that there are multiple links between officials in the Trump campaign and Russian agents. That is what is being investigated here. So when you say that there needs to be a suspected crime, well, it doesn't necessarily need to be a suspected crime by Donald Trump. It needs to be a suspected interference by foreign agents into the American electorate. That is what's at stake here. That is what's being investigated. And that's why this grand jury was first put together. That's why Miller has been put into this, and that's why they are looking further. In so doing, they continue to uncover places where Donald Trump himself is potentially linked to the investigation. So let's talk about some of that. Actually, when we talk about the suspected crime, there are a couple of them. Mike Flynn, for instance, was meeting with Russian agents talking about potential sanctions that the United States currently has on Russia when Obama was still in office. By doing so and then misleading the vice president, that is a potential interference, that is a potential illegality, which would be grounds for such an investigation. Manafort also may have accepted illegal funds from the Ukrainian president. He may have been funded by a foreign agent, which also would be an illegality. These are reasons to have the panel going. Then you have all of the different numerous levels in which you have connections between Trump officials and Russians. You talked about how the MI6 dossier was paid for. You know what? That's possible. I mean, we're not going to really be able to know that one way or the other. So I'll bring up some added information here. It's not just that. It's also that there have been intercepted electronic communications between American and Russian government officials. Now, the contents of those emails have not yet been released to the public, but the grand jury already has seen them. Miller already has seen them, and that's part of the reason why they are able to move forward. In these emails, it showed connections between Russian agents and American agents. In fact, former CIA director John Brennan told the House Intelligence Committee that, quote, "By the time I left office, I had unresolved questions in my mind as to whether or not the Russians had been successful in getting U.S. persons involved in the campaign or not to work on their behalf." So you have questions right there based on the intercepted information, the intercepted emails. There is potential collusion going on. That is what's being investigated.
Well, I think you've distorted the facts quite sufficiently in quite a number of ways. Michael Flynn, as an incoming part of Trump's administration, even while Obama was president, is perfectly within his rights to have some ambassador call him, say, "What about this?" And he is perfectly legal to say, "Wait until the new president is in. We'll take a look at it." In fact, Obama had communications with foreign countries before he was even elected, before he became the primary candidate, and I didn't see anybody going hyperventilating over that. The law that you're suggesting has never really been enforced, and in fact, if it was enforceable, we could go after Obama because he's kind of going to all these countries post-presidency and stirring up the pot because he disagrees with what Trump is doing. So what Michael Flynn did in his communications was not improper. It was not illegal. It's BS to suggest it was. Okay. The same thing with the Trump Jr. It would be perfectly legal for Trump Jr. to meet because some Russian may say, "Hey, I've seen what happens and how Hillary got a pass on the Clinton cash and the campaign donations and the pay to play and the Secretary of State. And I've got some dirt that would, and I'll bet you 99.99% of politicians and reporters would take that meeting if somebody said, "I've got dirt on this other candidate because they've done illegal things." So to say it was wrong, guess what? You're absolutely wrong. There is no law. There's no law against it. It's not illegal. It's not even immoral. If there is real dirt, the public has a right to know it. And right now, the biggest thing that has been talked about is, oh, the hacked servers. Well, guess what? The DNC servers were not hacked by Russia. There is no evidence that the DNC servers were hacked by Russia. In fact, it was probably an inside job, somebody who was disgusted with the DNC. Even the magazine, The Nation, which is a leftist, left-center magazine, published an article that suggests that, yeah, this was not an inside job by Russians. When you take away the hacking, there is nothing that you can really say that Russia did in terms of helping Trump. The only thing that Russia wanted to do was discredit our elections and make it look disreputable. So no matter who got into power, it would be harmful. But the reality is the Russians would have rather had Hillary because Trump, by drill now, drill everywhere, becoming more energy free, he's hurting Russia. Russia's biggest thing is the petrodollars, their exports. And when we are more energy self-sufficient because we're blasting away Obama's block drilling anywhere, we have more energy here. Oil prices drop down. Russia hurts. We're standing up to Russia.
All right. So I'm going to quote you on something you said here. You said, "If there is real dirt, the public has a right to know it." I agree. That's the whole point of why this has to happen. The only way that you can actually come to the conclusions, the only way you can come to the exact knowledge of what may or may not have happened is by going into a deeper investigation, which is why the grand jury has been put together. That is why, even through a Republican administration, Rosenstein and Miller and Comey himself, all of whom were Republicans, that is why they are looking into the potential actions of a foreign government interfering in American elections. Now, how exactly would they have done that? I don't know. I'm not really sure. But I do know that it has been put forward as a theory that maybe there was blackmail involved. Maybe they hacked the DNC. I don't know. I don't have that information. What I do know is that with the information that is out there, it seems clear that there's a lot of things going on that are shady. And those shady things deserve to be investigated, since the importance of the American electorate is at stake here. Our democratic process could potentially have been undermined, which is why it is necessary to have such an investigation. Now, you talked about how Flynn was perfectly within his rights. I have two responses to that. The first is he may have been within his rights unless there was a quid pro quo. If, as a person who did not have actual legal representation for the nation, he promised to give something to the Russians, then that would have been illegal. which is part of the reason what that might have been one of the things that he would have misled them about. The second response I have is that if he was within his rights, why did he lie about it? He not only lied to the press, he not only lied to the American people, he lied to his own boss. He lied to Mike Flynn, or he lied to Mike Pence, which if he had nothing to hide, why would he do that? He must have had something to hide. You also said it was perfectly legal for Trump Jr. to meet with the Russians, but the same response. If it was perfectly legal, why would he lie about it? Glenn Beck put together 38 times in which he specifically vehemently denied that he had had any contact with the Russians, but he had, and he had even been excited about it. He even said in his emails, if it's what you say it is, I love it. He wanted that. He was looking forward to it. So why would he lie about the fact that he had those sorts of contacts? I'm not going to touch on your Russians wanted Hillary point because that's not what they themselves have said. But overall, the question is...
Okay, I think what you're looking at here is the fact that you want investigations, but you're basically pushing for a permanent investigatory committees at all times to investigate the people in power. Okay, it gets rid of our current concept. We want a big brother to investigate everything. I think that's status, that's big brother. You're basically saying because somebody smeared and lied and distorted that we need to have a special prosecutor. Well, this whole special prosecutor thing, all of the laws regarding special prosecutor, Mueller, if he had any integrity, and he has zero, would recuse himself because he should be investigating Comey's leaks. He should be investigating Comey's mishandling of the Hillary investigation. He's a good friend of Comey. And since he's a good friend, if he had integrity, he would recuse himself and they would get somebody else. Since Trump is not guilty of anything, it would be appropriate for Sessions to have not recused himself. You end up with cases where people meet, like, for example, Sessions met 3 times, not twice, but some of those 3 times that he met with Russians, it was like group meetings. As a senator, he forgets about it. Okay, so to not reveal it is turned into a major lie and crime and distortion, and that's just not fair. Okay, Trump Jr. met with somebody who had dirt, but it turned out to be an impassioned plea by a lobbyist who wanted to end sanctions against Russia, and it was a big nothing burger. And it's very easy to forget about things like that because you're talking, many, many, many months before. You're basically spinning all sorts of stuff into crimes. I would like to revisit the idea of Scooter Libby's persecution by an unethical special prosecutor, Patrick Fitzgerald, who was given a carte blanche and unlimited money to go find out who leaked Valerie Plane's name. In the first week, the actual guy who did it went in and confessed, hey, I think it was me, Richard Armitage. He had inadvertently leaked it. It turned out that Plame was not a covered agent, so there was no crime. The leak was inadvertent, so there was no crime. Patrick Fitzgerald proceeded to spend over 2 years and over $50 million, and all he could do was get a conflict in recollections of statements between Scooter Libby and a journalist, Judith Miller. He then went to a very easy to pass against Republicans. He went to the D.C. area, got a grand jury, and said, Scooter Libby lied, and he prosecuted him. And the judge unethically denied Scooter Libby the ability to present evidence about, hey, I'm busy, I can't recall everything, and what I said that differed from what the journalist said was not relevant and germane, but somehow he went to jail.
I'm not particularly familiar with the Scooter Libby case, so I'm not really sure what your point is on that one. But I'll simply say that if it was a bad thing, and it sounds like it may have been a bad thing, then that's something I would agree is bad. But we're not talking about that case. We're talking about a different case here, which is the question of whether or not a foreign government interfered with the American election process. If that happened, that is something that the American public has a right to know about. And we should be putting forward all information we can to preserve the integrity of our elections. Because if we do not have the integrity of our elections, we do not have a democratic process. We give up what we are as a nation. Now, let me respond to some of your specific points here. You talked about how having a grand jury investigate this is basically having a big brother type government because it could be brought up at any time. Now, I would agree with you that a big brother government is bad. I'm not a statist in any way. I'm a classical liberal. But the focus of this is actually a very libertarian mindset. It is that we want transparency in government. That if there is to be government, we should know what is happening with this government. Having the government be able to operate behind closed doors is the opposite of free market or freedom or liberty, because you're giving the authority to an agency to operate outside of any guidelines. The whole point of having a grand jury is to ensure that our electorate was protected and that we had actual transparency, that we had actual legitimate integrity in our elections. You talked about how Miller should recuse himself because he's friends with Comey. Well, being friends with Comey doesn't have anything to do with this. It's about the evidence that he's specifically pursuing. We're talking, and you know what, even if he was to recuse himself, that doesn't negate the fact that someone should be investigating this. So that's not actually a response either way. You talked about how Trump is not guilty. Now, that's your personal opinion. Trump might not be guilty, or he might be guilty. We don't know. But for you to say that and then say we shouldn't even investigate it, you can't say that. If he has already been investigated and found not guilty, then excellent. But this investigation has not concluded yet. Maybe at the end of the investigation, what you said there will be found to be true, and that would be great. And I would love that. Or maybe we'll find something more. Who knows? The point is we need to be able to answer it for sure. The last thing you talked about was Trump Jr. and how it was a nothing burger. Well, I have two responses. The first is that Trump Jr. said that in an interview with CNN, he said he would never consider going into communications with the Russians, but clearly he had already been doing that. And secondly, his dad wrote his response. Clearly this is important.
Well, the fact that Trump Sr. may have helped write the response is neither criminal nor improper. A lot of times you'll have lawyers and you can have Trump with his lawyers in there trying to tailor the statement. Okay. My point with Libby was you can have an out of control special prosecutor spending lots of money and he'll investigate until eventually he can find something like misremembrances, and somebody can be threatened with 30 months of jail, $300,000 fine, and loss of law license. And this is what an out-of-control prosecutor does. Right now, Mueller is an out-of-control prosecutor because he's hired 17 people with close ties to Clinton Foundation, Clinton donations, and he's not got an impartial, fair set of lawyers. Okay? Until we clean house, what you're seeing is you want open transparency, but you must have been born in January, because for the past 8 years, we had a government that refused to investigate anything. The ATF's Fast and Furious, the IRS targeting of conservative groups, Hillary's multiple criminal actions that would have gotten any one of them put her in jail. The list is very long, and never did you have a special prosecutor appointed. Never did you have a grand jury impaneled. And you have a lot of collusion and collaboration where the FBI would bring Hillary's different people in, and they would interrogate them together with the lawyer present, which is a violation of processes. Hillary was interrogated without being sworn in. It wasn't videotaped. This whole thing has been a sham, and what we've got right now is we've got what's being called deep state, people who are attempting to protect the swamp, and they're going to investigate and investigate until they find something or until somebody says enough. Now, I would suggest that the assistant attorney general basically tell Mueller to read the special prosecutor statute and basically advise him, because when you have a close friend, you cannot investigate him. It is illegal. Mueller is in violation of the special prosecutor statute. And there's a lot of other conflicts that he's got problems with. And he's hired a lot of people with ties to Clinton Foundation and Clinton stuff, and they should not have been hired. There's a lot of just improper connections, and this whole thing is a charade. I'm not opposed to an investigation if somebody says, here's what we're looking for, and it's not just a wide open field, and it's done fairly with impartial people. I'll pass to you.
I'm actually going to give it back to you in a moment here, just because I have a question for you. What is your standard for what an appropriate investigation would include? With all of the evidence that has currently been uncovered, what would you consider to be appropriate? What would the standards be for that?
Well, I could say that the standards should be the same standards that was used to give Hillary a pass, in which case you don't do anything. We could do the same thing for ATF, in which case you don't do anything. Okay, same thing for the IRS investigation, in which case you don't do anything. If we want to have real standards, we find somebody with honor and integrity. We would find somebody like a Mark Levin, okay, and you'd say, here, you go dig out. I've got no problems with finding honorable people with integrity, but Mueller ain't it, and his 17 cohorts ain't it. They're not to be trusted. Comey should be being investigated for leaks and his collusion. Loretta Lynch, who was the attorney general, was colluding and working with Bill Clinton on the tarmac meeting. That should have been investigated. It wasn't.
Okay. So it seems to me like your problem is not as much that they are investigating the Trump-Russia connection. Your problem is that you don't trust the people involved at all. And more than, okay, all right, well, that's interesting. Now, do you think it was bad that they didn't investigate the Clintons and that Loretta Lynch was was connected to the Clinton Foundation? Do you think it's bad that these sorts of things were occurring?
Absolutely. I think it's a travesty of justice, the fact that you can, I mean, if you had time, and I'll give you some stuff, I can name you cases where a Democrat like Sandy Berger, who stole top secret documents from the National Archives and had his hand slapped and got a $50,000 fine and a misdemeanor, and Scooter Libby was being threatened with 30 months of jail and a $300,000 fine. It's like the jaywalker goes to jail for 30 years and the murderer gets off scot-free. I'm sorry, it's inappropriate. We do not have a system of justice. It's J-U-S-T space U-S, just us. Loretta Lynch is as corrupt as they come. Her meeting on the tarmac with Bill Clinton is proof of that. Her refusal to allow Hillary to be properly prosecuted is proof of that. The fact that Comey was allowed to stay on, the whole thing is rife with problems. And the deputy FBI guy, I mean, he was donating big money to a friend in Virginia for somebody who's running. And it's just like all this collusion, all this, you want real collusion? It's happening in the deep state with the Democrats. It's not Russia. And as I said, there is no real evidence that Russia actually did anything. The media was in the tank for Hillary. You cannot list me one serious item that Russia could have done to sway votes.
Okay. Well, the reason that I wanted to focus on that is simply because I agree with you. I think all that stuff is bad. And I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. And I think that I see the same disgusting activity from both of them. And so I certainly think that all those examples you were citing are problems. And I think you do too. And yet, I would ask that if you think those are problems, you should hold your own side accountable as well. Because I think that it's less about partisanship, and this is where I often wind up going. I want to have principles that aren't determined by being on the right or on the left. I want to hold each individual accountable to the truth. And it seems clear that there is potentially something off about the way the Trump administration has been having its dealings with Russian officials. And I would like to get to the bottom of that in the same way that I would like to get to the bottom of what Hillary Clinton was doing, in the same way that I'd like to get to the bottom of Fast and Furious, in the same way that I'd like to get to the bottom of any of these corrupt dealings that the DNC was involved in. My answer to you, and I think maybe we can even agree on this, is that I think they both should be investigated. Can we agree on that?
I would say we could agree on that, but the first thing you've got to do is you've got to go back and you've got to spend a few years investigating the deep state and the past people. You need to clean house at the FBI. You need to find out who supported empowering a special prosecutor or a grand jury for Hillary, ATF, et cetera. Keep those people on because they have integrity. You need to fire the rest of them. Okay, you need to fire Mueller and his 17 toadies who suck up to the Democrat Party and are actually out to try and hurt the legally elected administration. Trump is a buffoon in many ways, and Trump really doesn't know a whole lot political, and so he's made mistakes. And a lot of those buffoonery mistakes are mistakes, and they're not crimes. Like I said, you cannot show me one specific thing that Russia could have done to sway the election to Trump. And in fact, you can't explain why Russia would want Trump to be elected over Hillary. I gave you compelling reasons why Russia would want Hillary elected, and you didn't argue against that. So this whole collusion thing is a big nothing burger. I'm all for full investigation if we can get people of integrity. Mark Levin or people like him, put them in, go through, clean house, because for the past 8 years, we've had the seamiest, sleaziest, nastiest, disgusting people in power, and nothing got investigated, and nobody went to jail. That needs to be fixed first. Then we can start investigating the White House and everything else. And I'll bet we'll find far less problems than what we've had in the past 8 years.
To a certain extent, I agree with you. I think that you have a different perspective in a lot of these things about the deep state. And I think that there are certainly elements of a deep state that exist. Whether or not they all benefit liberals, like you seem to believe that they do, I would disagree with that. I think that if there is a deep state, it benefits itself, whether it's from the right or the left. It wants to remain in power, and that would occur whether there is a Republican or a Democrat there. So I would agree with you that we should try and clean house, that we should try and get rid of these established, entrenched power-grabbing organizations. But at the end of the day, I think where the two of us agree is that we do agree that further investigation is warranted, even if you would believe that should be done in a different way. And you know what? I think it's possible that it can be done in a different way. Maybe we could switch Mueller with someone else. I don't know. I'm open to those sorts of alternatives. But the ultimate question that we're asking in this debate is whether or not further investigation is warranted. For instance, the topic that I originally put up here was that there is evidence, and I think we agree there is evidence, that would justify further analysis into potential collusion between the Trump administration and Russia. And you say there's no evidence. Okay, well, there's no evidence necessarily of Russia specifically changing the results of the election, but there is evidence of them attempting to collude and interfere with the American electorate process. Okay, well, that's what my entire first speech was talking about, the multiple different connections with those. I'll let you go ahead and respond to that right now.
You have not proved any potential crime, okay? You've not given evidence of any potential crime. All you've done is a lot of allegations, none of which at the Trump level are crimes. My thing is you clean house. I would love to see you go back and prosecute Patrick Fitzgerald for his criminal actions and make sure that future special prosecutors are held on task. They're not given unlimited budgets. They're not given an ability to go snoop through everybody for everything, deep diving. That's wrong. That's not American.
Well, there certainly is a crime or potential for a crime in that what Manafort did, accepting campaign contributions from a foreign government, is potentially a crime. So was Trump Jr. accepting potential campaign contributions is potentially a crime. I know you're out of time, so I feel bad saying this, but each of these things are potential crimes, which is why they impaneled the jury in the first place. And then Trump himself has put himself into that point. He has put himself into the discussion. Now, at the end of the day, I think that what we both agree is that further investigation in one way or another is warranted, even though I think we both can agree that it should be done in an honest, intellectual